Good morning, it's Joyful Hermit. I'm waiting to get on top of the pain a little bit. I realized I fell asleep with the rosary in my hand. I wasn't praying it beyond just saying, Mother Mary, be with me. And that's often how it has become. This rosary was a gift from a monk from the Abbey of Gethsemane. He's in heaven now, Brother Rene. And I have other rosaries, but somehow this little plastic one that he made just seems very special to me. Maybe it was the second or third time I visited there for just a few days. I would stay with sometimes years apart of visiting. But he came up to me one day. He was the assistant guest master, and he said, you communicate with the Lord, don't you? And I said, what do you mean? And he explained himself a little bit more, and we realized we had a friendship of the spiritual nature, and I always felt as if there was someone out there who connected with me and understood my spiritual calling, more so than any other priest, other than there's been two now. One was with me in this journey for many, many years. It's probably one of the earliest priests that I met, very venerable holy priest, and he'll ever be a friend on this life or the next. And another one was one that the Lord allowed just brief physical friendship, and he happened to be the priest who was celebrating Mass March 2nd, 2 years ago, in which I was in my state during Mass. I had just had a marvelous confession with this bishop who was my spiritual director for a short time. And it was confession regarding my hermit life, that I felt yet again that I was not living it to the full that the Lord was asking of me, or even to the degree. I don't think we ever get to the full of how we should be living a vocation, or to the extent. But during Mass then, just my confession ended just maybe 5 minutes before Mass began, because this bishop had quite a bit to share, or wanted to at that time. It was our last confession even. I was I nearly had my neck broken at that Mass by, there again, people that later other people said they had never seen before, and they never saw since. But they thought that I was at first dead, and then in a diabetic coma, they later said. But it was odd how they started moving me about right during communion time. Later on, this priest, he's in Nigeria now, told me that it was right as he held up the host during consecration that he saw over that these people were moving my head around. And as it turned out, they let go of my head, and I have no control over my faculties at that time when I'm in that state. And my head fell back, and this priest said that he had a deep sense that the Lord was allowing that. But it resulted in my not being able to return, and having persecution from the rector, and then also the bishop abandoning. But this priest, who was from Nigeria, came to see me when it was Easter, he didn't have any way of finding out about me. He didn't want to ask the rector. But one morning I had quite a tremendous vision from Jesus, from the Lord, an event in my spiritual life. And during the day I was moved to call and leave a message for this priest. I really hadn't spoken with him before, other than in confession a couple of times. But the first time I went to confession to this Nigerian priest who was temporarily at the cathedral, my heart pounded as if it was going to just pound out. And it was behind a screen that I was in confession, but what this priest said to me the first time we quote-unquote met in confession without seeing each other was so rich and so filled with understanding. He was given light to grasp my soul being a mystic soul. And so I contacted him after I had been at home several weeks. And he said that just that morning he had asked the sacristan where I was. And the sacristan is hard of hearing. He and his wife were friends of mine. And he couldn't understand the priest's accent, very thick accent, very difficult to understand. And so he just shrugged in response to the priest. So the Holy Spirit put us together, but only briefly. Soon after, this priest was transferred to another town, and soon after that, he had to go back to Nigeria to do something regarding his visa. And while there, his visa got worked out, but his superior decided not to allow him to come back to that diocese. And the priest was most upset because he said part of his reason for wanting to come back was knowing how I was being mistreated by the other priests, the rector, and even the bishop. He was a retired bishop at that time, but the acting bishop even. And one of his reasons was he wanted to be able to take his day off to drive to where I lived, because he had been transferred to another town to bring me communion, because he knew I was being having to go without, that I was being abandoned. And it didn't surprise me that the Lord was allowing that he was not going to be able to come back to this country even. And every now and then he emails or on rare occasion calls me. My phone capabilities don't allow me to call overseas, and I really don't. Just my phone plan, it's costly enough as it is. But on occasion he calls me when he's able to from his country. So anyway, I'm coming again to. I did a little talk last night sharing, and it included this aspect that we only need approval by God. But yesterday the Holy Spirit was letting me know to try to explain further that when I'm sharing, it's on more of the spiritual level or the spiritual view, and that many may not understand this view, or that I'm sharing in that with that view in mind. And at one level, it's only God's approval and his making us credible and his validation that we need. But it is not wrong to ask for temporal approval. because many times in many situations that is necessary in the temporal realm. For example, we need certification if we are going to be public school teachers or even private school teachers, most private schools. Professors need accreditation by accredited universities, or some universities need accreditation. Even in public office, most often, in order to get voted in, they need to give their credentials so that they can be validated, so that they will win an election. That's the way of the world, and it's also the way of the temporal Catholic world, the world of the church. And it's not bad, and it's not wrong. But I'm speaking in the spiritual realm, that ultimately, and for our souls, when it comes right down to the nub of the spiritual, that we only need approval by God. And especially if we are living within the Catholic Church, or whatever church, whatever vows we have made, whatever commitments, that if we are living that life, ultimately that's the approval we need, is God's approval. But it's not wrong if God calls us, say, to canonical approval, if that's the call to which we answer, or which He desires for us, His will, then of course one should go through that process and seek the approval of one's bishop. But if the Lord is not calling us to that path, then we don't. And ultimately, even if we are called to that path, should there ever arise any other situations, and to know that even a priest who's called to the holy orders, and that very much means going through a pathway of being approved to go to seminary, approved in that vocation by the bishop, and approved through holy orders, ordained to the priesthood, that ultimately, and in the spiritual, and at death, of course, the approval necessary is God's approval, but God works through the process of holy orders and through the church. But for most of us, there is not any kind of formal approval. We live our lives progressing in the spiritual path without any kind of public notice or necessary approval, other than in our confirmation. So I want to try to clarify the two paths, and it has made me understand a little more that perhaps my sharing and my writing needs to deal with this aspect of my life, because it is the reason why many of the persecutions have occurred, and it's the reason why God keeps guiding my life, even here in what I call Patmos, with my computer being my Prochorus. John, when he was exiled to Patmos, they think around 95 AD, that a man named Prochorus, who actually was one of the first 7 of the elders, or I think they called them elder deacons, I don't know. Anyway, it's in you can research it. But he had a scribe. This Prochorus went with John as a scribe. And it was on Patmos that John wrote Revelation. He received revelations, and Prochorus wrote them down, what John told him to write. And John also wrote, either it was he himself or Prochorus did the writing, the Gospel of John on this island called Patmos. Well, being an island or not does not matter. It was a place of exile. I mean, it was a literal island for John, but it was a place of his exile. And that is where I am. I'm on a Patmos, and the Lord let me know just prior to my coming. I mean, he let me know this was my place of exile, and I am to do writing here. And all of my manual labor became, it's so heavy laden and seemingly endless, but there will be an end to it one way or another, of course. There always is. All things are passing. But recently the reminder to write came, and to alter my daily schedule to include the writing or the sharing and the verbal sharing. So but I think this sharing needs to include the mystical, because that is part and parcel of my journey and my existence on this earth. And I heard a YouTube video of a priest explaining why someone would be a hermit. But his take and view did not include what is my call, or a part and parcel of my hermit call. So there's more to be explained, I think, and part of it is inclusive, but part because each person's walk is unique and a unique call of God. I'm going to try to delve into the mystic aspect and how that can alter the hermit life, and also the I'm seeing that it makes a difference in those who are called to a more the public profession and approval, and the more private and hidden profession. So I'm going to pray about this more, but it's also something that very much affects the path within parish life for a hermit or for anyone who is a mystic. It makes a difference and affects the activity level or not. God bless His real presence in you this day and always.